Welcome to today's show. I am your host, Eric Darnley Small, and I want to thank you for once again joining me on today's show. I just wanted to remind everybody watching, as typical with this show, that you can like and subscribe it. If you're watching this on YouTube, and you can click the bell, of course, to be notified of new content as it becomes available. And as always with this show, I am going to read portions of news articles that I find fascinating. But I want you to know you can read for yourself. I'll provide links, not in the description below, but on our Mastodon at mastodon.vtip.me/@ what you missed. And there you'll be able to link, you'll be able to find the link, and you'll be able to read the entire articles yourself. I highly encourage that, so that you can get the full context, because I don't have time on this show, which I always endeavor to make as short as possible, 10 to 15 minutes, but I end up going 30 minutes or more. But because I don't have the kind of time to read through the entire article, nor do I think it's really fair to do that, I want you guys to take a look at what I'm looking at, read it for yourself, and come to your own assessments, and then hit me up on Mastodon and let me know what your takeaway was, if it's different from mine. So let me get into it right now so that we don't waste any more time. On today's show, I want to talk about a real estate crisis in Florida, which I find absolutely fascinating. We know during COVID, a lot of people flocked from places like New York and upstate to southern states like Florida and Texas. A lot of those states have bragged about how it is because of their policies, their conservative policies, that this flocking happened. I've argued, however, that I totally agree with people. People are too overloaded in New York and California and those states, and they should leave. Particularly Democrats should leave those states and move out, because these states are overcrowded, which makes pricing so high, particularly with respect to real estate. But now we're beginning to see the cracks in that belief system in a state like Florida. It's also in Texas, but this Florida one is actually fascinating because, as I have mentioned before, once you begin to move large quantities of people from one location to the other, the belief is that they're much cheaper and they're safer and they're more efficient because of their policies. But what you're going to find is, as more people move to that state, resources get used up. And as more resources get used, the expense to live there gets used. Housing costs more. And you have to raise taxes because you need to somehow figure out how you're going to get the infrastructure up and running properly in order to keep that state running efficiently. So the criticisms of blue states are usually criticisms because those states have been so successful and so many people want to move to them because so much opportunity is there. But as opportunity moves out of those states into other states and people move to those other states, those states are going to go under a tremendous strain. And you're going to see, and I think you're beginning to see it right now in Florida, particularly with this story, you're going to begin to see calls on raising taxes. Nobody wants to see taxes increase. You're going to see calls on doing something about the infrastructure, spending more money in order to make the state more livable. And they're going to slowly begin to become all the things that Republicans supposedly think is so great about their state, when in fact it's not. It's just because every state has to deal with the situation of more people in it. So as people move to those states, particularly in Florida, they have a condo crisis, real estate crisis. I'm going to talk about that on today's show. I'm going to talk about this interesting thing out of California. No one seems to be talking about this. I speak to even Democrats, liberals, about this. California has, since George Floyd, has been doing some pretty extraordinary things in order to deal with racial injustice. And one of the things that they did is they created a commission to research the history of racism and exploitation and injustice in California, but actually all over the United States. And they have targeted a number of areas where the state got it wrong. The state did the wrong thing. And they're trying to slowly correct the record, change the record. And there's two interesting stories here. expect lawsuits, expect conservatives to fight against this, because as we know, they believe that the people of today shouldn't have to pay for the mistakes of yesterday. I mean, that whole argument is dubious in my mind, but it is their argument, and expect them to take it to the Supreme Court, to the very conservative Supreme Court, as California and other states decide to try and reckon with this. But if you're African American and you are wondering why you should vote Democrat and what Democrats do for you, because I know that there are those influencers out there who are black who want to nullify the vote. They don't want blacks voting for Democrats. You can vote for Republican, you can vote for anyone, but don't vote for a Democrat. And they have all the reasons why. Joe Biden's too old, Joe Biden's enfeebled, etc. But this is the reason why you vote, right? There is still calls as of today. This is being recorded and this is being uploaded on Sunday. This is a special episode. I don't usually shoot over the weekend, but as I did yesterday, so much came out Thursday and Friday that I needed some time to process it to do these videos. So that's why I'm doing them on the weekend. But it's one of the things that's really important, particularly with today. There's still calls and still discussions about Biden's performance on Thursday. You vote not based on the individual, but based on their policies. And I don't care how bad a debater Joe Biden is or how old he is. He has people around him, and he is implementing a policy that helps progressives, that helps the climate, to deal with climate change, that helps African Americans, that helps poor people, that helps all of these things, rein in runaway capitalism, etc. So when we hear black influencers in particular try to talk to black folks about not voting for Democrats, what have Democrats done for you? Here's a substantial situation right here in California, where they're beginning to address the issues of social injustice and historic injustice. Why is that important? What does that have to do with black people today? Well, you'll never fix the problems of African Americans without dealing with racism. You can do a lot more than I think that the black community is doing to fix ourselves, and that has to do with an A over B exploitation, etc. I'm not going to go into that on this video, but there's a lot that even the exploited can do to make their situation better and to change things so that the exploiter, in this case, the federal government, the state and local governments that have used historically their power to destroy the black community, destroy black families, destroy our opportunities to, have the enjoyment that every other American should have, which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the Declaration of Independence. That's supposed to be the North Star. That's supposed to be why this country was created to begin with, why we fought a war. In order for us as black people to get the advantages of that, we have to begin to deal with our own internal issues, and we have to support those folks in power, particularly white folks. They're the only ones who can dismantle racism, and we have to support them. That's why, as a black person, I vote Democratic, and I'm a progressive, not because they're always right about everything, but because they're the only ones willing to fight to dismantle racism and to give the support that we need to help our own communities. Long way of saying that this is a fascinating article. This deals with California trying to return lands back to their native, to native people, indigenous tribes in California that was taken away. In addition, California's budget has some money for reparations, which I find interesting. I'll talk about that. And then finally, on the international beat, Javier Milei in Argentina, the Argentinian prime minister or president, I can't remember which, no, I think it's prime minister, but we'll find out in a minute, passed his budget. And this is a case study about how sometimes progressive economics gets it wrong. And maybe in this way, capitalism gets it right. We'll find out. I've been talking about this for some time. I'm fascinated to see what happens here. I'm going to talk about just briefly about what happened recently with regard to his agenda. And then coming up, I've got tomorrow, the Supreme Court of the United States is going to be releasing its last few cases on the docket. I think there are 6 left. We expect to get Trump's immunity and find out what's going on there. I expect there to be a dismantling of sort of a lot of the norms and values and decisions that came out of particularly Nixon, the court's position after Nixon and Watergate. I expect that to be completely dismantled. There was a lot of conversation about Article 2, meaning the executive branch, during the oral arguments, and I expect that that would be a big thing that they're going to target in order to restore the power to the presidency over these agencies like the FBI, the CIA, the investigative, the Justice Department over the presidency. In addition, I have to talk about the Chevron deference and how the Supreme Court, which has been giddy over dismantling Chevron, finally did it. So I'm going to discuss that and the significance of that tomorrow as well. But I want to find, as I indicated, two quick stories I found fascinating this week regarding Florida real estate and two regarding California's attempts to restore past sins. And I'm going to begin here with Florida's real estate crisis, just when you thought leaving New York was such a smart move. And it goes into, and this is an article that is out of Newsweek. And I want to really kind of, I want to talk about this article, and then I'm going to go into a video that gives even more detail on what's going on here. But the article says the Sunshine State is currently facing an ongoing insurance crisis as premiums have skyrocketed in the past couple of years due to a combination of excessive litigation, widespread fraud, and the heightened risk of natural disasters. Last year, homeowners in the state paid $6,000 per year in homeowner insurance, according to data from the Insurance Information Institute, the highest rate in the country. Resident Ken Shandelson said that he, quote, would prefer the legislature focus on these two issues rather than lowering property tax. Newsweek contacted DeSantis spokesperson for comment early on Friday. Under the current law, Florida homeowners are allowed to lower the assessed value of their homes by up to $50,000 and reduce their taxes accordingly, as long as it is their primary residence. House Bill 7019, which passed the Republican-led state legislature earlier this year and was signed by DeSantis last Friday, would increase the exemption, granting qualifying homeowners an additional sum of up to $25,000 on top of the $50,000. The exact value will be based on the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers so that homeowners won't suffer from the rise of inflation. The additional exemption won't be applied to levies imposed by school districts and won't benefit renters. For Bob Wells, a 64-year-old resident of Walton County, this is a source of concern. Quote, first, this could negatively affect other government entities that provide services such as independent districts, he told Newsweek. Secondly, if it's such a great idea, why exclude schools or have state-funded slush fund to make up the loss for smaller, more rural areas that will be negatively impacted, and how long will that assistance be available? Republican registered voter Donna M. said, our state needs so much infrastructure repair due to neglect and new buildings only. The most important part of the bill is the commitment to replenish counties and municipalities given up by the relief. This is another way for the state to remove power from the counties and municipalities. Our local governments would become welfare recipients, she said, adding that the entire bill is mentioned so that people can make evaluated decisions. David Thompson, a resident of Tampa, told Newsweek that he will absolutely support the bill when it is on the ballot in November. I bought my primary residence in 2021. My homeowner's insurance went way up. My property taxes went way up, and I got added to a flood zone by 20 feet. I need help. When Thompson bought his current home in 2021, the property was not in a flood zone, but in an area that hadn't flooded in over 100 years. The following year, they moved the flood zone boundary to include my house by about 40 feet. My flood insurance went from 0 to $966 a year, he said. While Thompson admits that money is an important issue as he approaches retirement, he said that the increase in property taxes is not what really bothers him. What's worse for him is that he feels no investment has been made into his city, Tampa. What bothers me most is the lack of improvements in areas which have now provided huge increases to the city's property tax revenue, he told Newsweek. I live in a gentrified neighborhood of South Tampa near MacDill Air Force Base, many homes of which had retired military personnel. In the last 10 years, home values have gone from $70,000 to $400,000, he said. Despite getting significantly more tax revenue, the city has not put any money into this neighborhood. So this is my point, and this is why I think this is interesting. A number of things have come up. Number one is, as people, and note that this last person bought their place in 2021. So that's around the COVID time, right? People were moving from north to south, moving from states like New York into Florida. But one of the things that they're finding is that there's been no investment in the city. And they're beginning to see that because there's been no investment, the infrastructure of the city is straining, is having difficulty dealing with this new influx of people. In addition, there's a huge increase in property tax. Why? Because you have this influx in people and the city needs more of that money coming in. However, according to this, that money is not going to the city and to deal with the infrastructure. Where is it going? I have no idea. But it's not going to dealing with these issues. Then you've got, of course, on top of that, a much more of a, I don't know, I guess you would call it an expansive view. Again, you have to remember that these are supposedly conservatives in a conservative state, which is trying to push low government, less government, government closest to the people, right? Should lead them. And yet you have in this state, big government, state government, Ron DeSantis is going in and taking money out of municipalities, stripping away their ability to deal with these issues. You have all kinds of stuff. This guy's talking about a flood zone. All of a sudden, when he bought his place, he wasn't in a flood zone. Now, all of a sudden, he is, and his insurance rate has gone up. That's the other issue. Insurance is going through the roof. Why is insurance going through the roof? Because of neglect. Why neglect? Because there's been a denial of climate change for years. And DeSantis just recently removed all mention of climate change from any and all documentation that the legislature produces. So this is folly. This is a mistake on his part, and it's only going to make things worse, not better. But there's this video, fascinating video, and this is from the affiliate in Florida, the local affiliate. I'll see in a minute. I think it is it's an ABC affiliate that talks to this gentleman, and I think it's just a fascinating report. Because there's something else is going on here, and that is the disaster of the collapsing of the Champlain Towers in Florida. And the shock of that has caused a big government response. Again, you can only look at this as big government, the very thing that the Republicans say that they're against. They push through a big government response, which is forcing these buildings, forcing the boards to force homeowners, who are a lot of these guys, of these folks are retirees, to pay enormous sums to fix the buildings. And because of years of neglect, years of so-called freedom and free market and whatever you may call it, small government, these communities, these residents are now having to get hit with giant assessments that should have been done years ago. So let me play this video and I'll come back to it.
Some South Florida condo owners are being hit with six-figure assessments that are forcing them to flee.
The situation is leaving many unable to sell or afford the staggering cost. Local 10 News investigator Jeff Weinseer has the numbers.
Sleepless nights?
Sleepless nights? Every night.
I don't know where we're going to live or how we're going to live.
Howard Konitz never thought he'd be in this situation at 79 years old.
We can't afford it. We can't afford it. We're going to go broke.
Konitz and his wife Sheila have lived in their 2-bedroom, 2-bath Williams Island condo for 10 years. The retired couple had their financial future all planned out.
Elevator modernization.
That was until they were recently hit with a special assessment.
The total assessment for the apartment we're sitting in is what?
Approximately $224,000.
When you say that number, can you believe it?
No, not at all.
That's on top of their monthly maintenance that's gone from $1,500 to $3,000.
We never anticipated to have this escalation.
According to Condo Doc's assessments in Mediterranean Village in Williams Island, where Konitz lives, are as high as $400,000 for just one apartment. Projects budgeted for his building include everything from consultants to roofing, concrete restoration, elevator modernization, termite treatment, and $700,000 alone for landscaping.
Somebody also told me, well, if you're not able to pay, you shouldn't be living here.
The assessments at Williams Island can't be passed on to a potential buyer. Konitz has had his condo on the market and has dropped the price several times. He was turned down for a reverse mortgage by a lender due to strict condo rules.
Maybe I can give it away for pennies on the dollar.
He is not alone. This listing at the Cricket Club in North Miami discloses a $134,000 assessment. A new Florida law enacted after the 2021 collapse of the Champlain Towers in Surfside mandates increased building inspections and reserve funding for condo buildings. The rules come with a hefty price tag for owners of older buildings.
Have you ever seen numbers like this?
No.
Susie Friedel has been a realtor for 50 years. She's a mediator for the Miami Board of Realtors and the Florida Supreme Court.
What is the assessment on the apartment that you have for sale?
Just about $290,000. There needs to be assessments. The problem is they've done too much at one time. The boards have gotten so nervous about all this that now they're doing everything at once.
There is no comment on camera from the association. In a brief phone conversation, association president Mike Siegel said, quote, "We wouldn't be doing it if we didn't have to. It's not like we're stealing people's money."
You know, the board does what they want.
The position you're in, what do you do?
Pray.
In Aventura, Jeff Weinseer, Local 10 News.
So this is what happens when you neglect, when you decide that for all kinds of reasons, freedom is really about trying to prevent government from coming in and quote unquote doing all kinds of government stuff, big government harassing you, big government this and that, right? They waited until the last minute until this building collapsed, and now they passed this bill, and now these poor residents are having to deal with the disaster of unbelievable assessments on top of unbelievable increases in maintenance. And what was once affordable, once a place that a retiree can go away and, you know, live the rest of their lives totally fine and in relative comfort, has now become a disaster. And if you moved down there, sold your home, moved down there, thought that you could pass this on to a loved one or something like that, and you would have a beautiful place. That place is gorgeous. That community looks gorgeous. You're going to go broke, and you can't unload the place. So, and I believe, and it doesn't say that, but I believe from what I've heard that if you can't pay the assessments, the boards can give you what they think is fair market value and throw you out. So it's a slow-moving disaster. The whole situation with climate and the whole situation with insurance companies leaving. California has the same problem too. I'm not saying that that's not it, but California is not in denial about climate. California is not in denial about the role government has to play in forcing states and municipalities to do something about the problems that are going on in California. For instance, there's this NIMBY. The California legislature is forcing places to build more homes and housing. They have to deal with skyrocketing real estate prices. And you have to do that. Unfortunately, they waited until it was a crisis, but you have to do that sooner before it becomes a crisis. And unfortunately, California didn't do that. It's paying the price. But on top of that, Florida, which claims to be a small government, which claims to be affordable, or claims to be a better place to live, well, turns out that if you believe that and bought down there in 2020, 2021, you are in the shock of your life. If you're in one of these big time, beautiful places and bought it for $200,000, and now you've got a $400,000, $300,000, $200,000 assessment that you have to pay. So it's stunning, and it's shocking. I'm going to keep on that story. It's fascinating. Moving on, I'm clipped at the top. But Gavin Newsom announces a historic land return effort, and California budget has money for reparations. This is from his website, ca.gov, and the Washington Post. And again, as I've said before, links are in the mastodon.vtip.me/@ what you missed. And this one is from the governor's website, and it says, on the 5th anniversary of the state's apology to California Native American peoples, Governor Gavin Newsom today announced the state's support for the return of over 2,800 acres of ancestral land to the Shasta Indian Nation. This return is one of the largest in state history and part of the state's ongoing efforts to right the historic wrongs committed against the Native communities of California. This is a quote from Newsom, this work is a down payment on the state's commitment to do better by the Native American communities who have called this land home since time immemorial. By listening to and working with these tribes across the state, including to return ancestral lands and restore the environment, we are healing deep wounds and rebuilding trust between our peoples. Earlier this month, Gavin Newsom visited the Klamath River Dam Removal Project, the largest river restoration project in American history that will rehabilitate over 300 miles of salmon habitats, and discussed the ancestral land return with leaders of the Shasta Indian Nation. With the support of the state, the Shasta Indian Nation is pursuing the transfer of 2,820.860 miles of Parcel B lands associated with the dams. The Shasta Nation is pleased with the governor's decision to support the return of our ancestral lands and sacred sites. So this is a stark contrast, by the way, with California's governor, as opposed to Kristi Noem, who is, I think was it North Dakota's governor, who is banned by about a quarter of her state's land that is owned by the Native people, that by the Indian tribes, right? She can't go into those lands, and she's at war with the Native people that live there. Here in California, they are working side by side to restore historic wrongs. Stark difference, and again, an example of why you vote Democrat as opposed to Republican if you're black or a Native American. This is from the Washington Post. I'm clipped at the top. Sorry about that. But it says, California's reparations movement reached a new milestone after the state's lawmakers recently set aside $12 million in its next budget to provide compensation for black residents. This is, by the way, the Washington Post. It's done June 28th by Emmanuel Felton. The budget deal is historic, said Chris Lodges, a reparations activist who lobbied lawmakers on the issue. California is pursuing what could become the country's largest and most expensive government-funded effort to offer reparations to black residents for decades of racial discrimination. But the $12 million included in California's $300 billion budget is a fraction of what reparations activists wanted. Last year, a reparations task force established by the state legislature recommend billions in reparations, including $1.2 million in payments for lifelong black California residents older than 50 years old. Given the state's financial condition, supporters say they are encouraged that any money was allocated at all. Since the death of George Floyd in 2020 In the months of protests that followed earlier this month, Chicago issued formal apology to black residents for the harms caused by slavery, Jim Crow laws, and present-day policies, and Mayor Brandon Johnson signed an executive order creating a city reparations task force. The District of Columbia in 2025 budget proposal includes $1.5 million to establish a commission to study reparations for black Washingtonians descended from enslaved peoples or affected by Jim Crow era institutional racism. The measure still must be approved by the D.C. Council. In the wake of the Tulsa decision and Evanston lawsuit, folks have been asking, is the reparations movement really going anywhere? Said Trevor Smith, executive director of the BLIS Collective, a nonprofit focused on restitution for black and Native Americans. So the fact that California continues to lead the way is really important. The state's reparations effort is still facing resistance from state Republicans and some Latino and Asian lawmakers who have argued that it's unfair to make the current residents, a majority of whom are people of color, pay for the sins of the state's white founders. The California budget legislation doesn't spell out how the $12 million would be spent. Instead, it calls for the money to be applied to reparations-related bills still working their way through the legislature. None of the pending legislation called for direct cash payments to the descendants of enslaved people, despite the state task force recommendations. We're never going to take cash payments off the table, said Branford, the state lawmaker, but we're trying to level set to let people know that cash payments are probably long ways off. So, again, a reminder of why it is you choose Democrats. You want somebody who is going to take seriously this issue of racism and exploitation of blacks. Furthermore, people don't talk about, because they talk about Jim Crow and all this kind of stuff, but there is still exploitation, there is still injustice for blacks happening still till this day. I'm going to do a whole show on, hopefully coming up, I'm going to do a whole show on what we discovered with Ferguson. That was the city where Mike Brown, Ferguson, Missouri, where Mike Brown was shot and killed. And the biggest thing to come out of that was an exploration into the city government, the police, the Justice Department there, and how it let down those community members, of all of whom, or a majority of whom, are poor and black, and how race played a huge part in whether you got fines, were arrested, pulled over, etc., or if you didn't. So this isn't something that is Jim Crow and enslaved era. This is something that is still happening today, and nobody is talking about it, and I think it's important. Finally, on this one, I want to talk about Argentina and this very interesting story. This is out of Forbes. Milei delivers a key libertarian reform law. Now, let me just say, for those who might be listening who think I'm a fan of Milei, I am not. However, what I am is somebody who is interested in seeing both sides and who doesn't believe that Democrats or progressives have all the answers. I think we're wrong on certain things, and this may be an example. Argentina, just for people who don't know, was probably would be the biggest example of what a socialist state would look like. What it would look like if, for instance, your wildest progressives, like let's say Bernie Sanders, had created a state, right? There are huge price controls. There's huge protection for workers and for unions. There are the government owns everything, state-run. All of the levers of money is state-run. They print money in order to keep people, to give people money in order to survive. It's just a huge, huge, big government socialist system. And they are being crushed by inflation, so much so that their money is worthless. And it's been going on for a long time. Perón, his wife was famous, named Evita Perón. The Perón government, and they're called Peronians, who have ruled the government since I think the 60s or so. They have been in power until just recently, where this guy Javier Milei, who is a libertarian, is a bit of a radical, has come in and proposed radical things, and he wants to privatize everything, and he wants to begin to strip away all of these protections for individuals, for people. And it was thought that the government would not elect someone like that. They were wrong. They did elect him. And he's beginning to implement his very radical view. And that very radical view is really beginning to take shape. And he's beginning to make headway. And I think that if you're somebody who wants to get to the truth and is not an ideologue, you have to look at both sides of where you're wrong and where you're right. And this may be an example of a concern that liberals should look at when we talk about spending and not worrying about deficits, and when we talk about price controls and turning most of the levers of industry over to the federal government, away from private government, like the utilities and that sort of thing. So anyway, this is International Story. This is, again, Argentina. And this is from Forbes. Forbes is famously a right-wing, Steve Forbes has always been a right-wing guy. But anyway, I'm going to go into this article. And it goes, this is by Susie Violet Ward. And this was from June 28th. And it says, in a landmark decision, the Argentine Chamber of Deputies approved the law of foundations and starting points for the freedom of Argentines, known as Ley de Bases. The approval marks a victory for President Javier Milei administration, aiming to steer the nation towards economic stability and prosperity. The final votes tallied 147 in favor and 107 against, while the fiscal reforms, which include the reinstatement of income tax, passed 136 votes in favor and 116 against. It seeks to address the deep-rooted economic challenges that have affected Argentina for decades. The law aims to create a favorable environment for investment, particularly through the introduction of an investment regime for large projects with special fiscal incentives. This framework is expected to attract investment important for the revitalization of Argentina's economy. The reforms intend to increase government revenue and reduce the fiscal deficit. The reinstatement of income tax is an important aspect of these reforms intended to create a more sustainable fiscal structure. Despite previously voting to abolish income tax for payroll employees, Milei is now reinstating it due to the urgent economic crisis, going against his prior stance and the platform on which he was elected. The government also plans to privatize certain state-owned companies. The approval and the fiscal reforms represent a shift in Argentina's economic policy and governance. The administration aims to eliminate what it terms as future recipes of misery and embrace ideas of freedom and market-driven growth. So that is something straight out of, right-wing viewpoint of government. I'm fascinated, and I'm going to continue following this. But let's see what they do with this. I mean, I'm very curious to see what they do with this. This is going to be very painful. It's going to be painful for a long time. But the young people of Argentina know that they cannot continue moving on this way. And the misery index and the suicide index and all of that kind of stuff has been pretty high amongst the young people of Argentina. And I just think that we have to, as open-minded people, we have to look at whether rather a Milton Friedman type of policy works in Argentina to course correct, because it's bad there. It's very bad. So final thoughts here. The first thing, of course, is that this whole red wave mirage, right? Everything that came out of COVID, that so many people, so many Republicans have bragged about how their policies of low taxes, etc., is why people are moving to the state. But as people move from blue states to red states after COVID, we're beginning to see the strain and regret amongst a lot of people. You know, as people begin to move to these places, taxes are going to go up, real estate's going to go up, inflation is going to go up. All of these problems that they say exist in blue states because of blue state policies are beginning to move to those red states. You've got states in denial of climate change. Again, Florida is ground zero. Red states are having to reckon with the economic damage that they ignore. You know, as I indicated earlier, Ron DeSantis is still ignoring climate, but you've got massive flooding, and it continues. And by the way, it's affecting real estate, and it's affecting insurance. Insurance rates are through the roof where you can get insurance. A lot of insurance companies are leaving these states because they cannot afford to continue to deal with massive storms and massive floodings. They're going broke. Third thing is, blue states are repairing the damage. California and other blue states are paving the way to healing the damage done by white racism. And, hopefully that is going to aid into creating more of opportunities for African Americans to begin to heal their own communities. And finally, as I indicated, will capitalism work? Argentina could be the test case on if capitalism can reform the country, if capitalism really, what it looks like, I should say, if socialism is made dominant and capitalism is brought in to sort of move the far left further to the right. Of course, you can go too far right, but what does it actually look like when a country actually begins to embrace capitalism, begins to change away from socialism, and begins to embrace a different way of doing things? I'm going to follow this all the way through. I'm absolutely fascinated to see what happens with Argentina, and I hope you are too. Thank you for joining me on today's show. You will see me tomorrow. The SCOTUS is going to release its final last cases. Of course, the Trump immunity being the biggest. And we're going to talk about Chevron deference being dismantled. I'll see you then. Take care. Have a great day. Have a great day, everybody. Hey there, fantastic viewers. Eric Darnley Small here. And I hope you're loving today's episode of What You Missed. You've reached the end of today's show, but don't worry, there's more show coming up. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click the bell so that you'll be notified when more content is available. You can also help the channel by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. It helps the YouTube algorithm find new viewers so that I can keep bringing you all this incredible content you enjoy. But wait, there are more ways to support the show. You can make a contribution through the show's PayPal, which goes a long way in helping produce even better content for you. And consider becoming a part of our growing community by joining our Mastodon site at mastodon.vtip.me/@whatyoumissed for more engaging discussions and exclusive updates. And here's something you won't want to miss. Mark your calendars for our live show streaming on YouTube and stream.vtip.me Monday mornings, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Your support means the world to me, and together we're making What You Missed the best it can be. Thanks for being a part of my journey.